Welcome to the In Between podcast,
a space for real conversations and meaningful interviews about life, faith, culture, leadership,
and everything in between. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the In Between podcast. This is a great one. But before I get to it, I do want to say, if you listened to our last episode featuring Dr. Richard Middleton, you'll notice that it was a little bit echoey. The sound was like a little bit wonky. So thank you for being patient if you made it all the way through. It was a great conversation, completely understandable, but we're trying some new things around here. And so we appreciate your patience as we learn and grow. This week, we are talking about one of my favorite conversations, which is the sort of way that technology, things like artificial intelligence, these chatbots that you've been hearing about, ChatGPT, how we can think about those things as people of faith and how we can interface with technology in ways that are meaningful and thoughtful and that do not lead to like crazy disastrous ends like a lot of bad technology books. So it's a great conversation. And we also talk a little bit about what does it mean to be a leader in these kinds of conversations, because my guest is just that. I'm welcoming back to the show Dr. Lathania Butler, dear friend, as well as public policy expert and data practitioner. She works in this field of AI right here in Columbus, Ohio. So she's a kind of a resident expert who kind of always keeps me in the normal of the conversation, bringing me back to what actually are the facts, Julia, when I text her all the time with different articles that are like, well, what about this thing that I just read about this ChatGPT or Sydney thing? So really excited for you to listen in. Lathania loves to nerd out on economic ideas, which I think is amazing, and artificial intelligence strategies. She's also deeply committed to promoting justice and truth in the world. Lathania's followed Jesus for 18 years on winding paths and to miraculous places. And she now meets the Lord regularly in playtime with her daughter and son, who are lovely, who she shares with her wonderful husband, Davonte. Lathania has her bachelor's in neuroscience, a master's degree in public administration, and her PhD in public policy analysis from The Ohio State University. She's been a member of Vineyard Columbus for 13 years and has led in all sorts of different spaces around here. This is a great episode. I am really glad that you will get to listen into it. Enjoy. So, Lathania, Dr. Butler, I'm so excited for this conversation. How are you feeling?
Good. I'm excited to have these conversations with you, with an audience. Because
Exactly.
we have these conversations all the time.
Exactly. So I frequently send you long SMSs having to do with artificial intelligence, chatbots, the potential end of the world, my concept of sin without skin being really problematic, like in the whole universe of things. And so I think about this conversation about things like artificial intelligence, technology, chatbots, this sort of Sydney thing that Microsoft Bing put out. I'm thinking about that from like a really, I hope, theological point of view with some pastoral concerns, mostly because I think Christians are called to think. Let me just say, Christians are called to think. And I know you are a great thinker, but you come to this conversation as an expert, or at least somebody who's operating in this field. So maybe we could start with just a couple of simple things. Like when I talk to people about these kinds of conversations, folks typically have a whole spectrum of responses. One is there's like a lot of awareness about AI and technology. People are really interested. They're super curious. It's like the crypto craze, right? You've got some people who are like all in. And then on the other side, you have people who don't have any idea what we're talking about. But most people live like in the in-between space, which basically is the space that says like, if it makes my life better, that's great. If I can write my Shakespeare paper using ChatGPT, why wouldn't I do that? Could you just, as we lift out of that, give like the summary, simple explanation of like, what are we talking about when we talk about artificial intelligence, particularly as it's used in these like large language learning model things, and the kind of technology that's behind some of this chatbot stuff that ranges from like, here, I can draft a paper on, exoskeletons to here, I can have a conversation with you and it creeps you out because it seems really human. What is that thing and how does it work? Simple version.
Well, first of all, we should just establish that it's not magic, it's math. So that's one of the sayings of like my leader at work.
Okay.
It's not magic, it's math. It's all math. So the large language models that you're referring to, they're taking advantage of the fact that our language has structure, right? Every language has a structure. We have verbs, nouns, we have articles, and implicitly we all sort of understand that structure. Like when we're babies, we're sort of born hardwired to learning that structure. And so essentially what we do is we've taught computers the linguistic structure and applied that to math, translated that structure to numbers.
So it's like English and math class.
Yes. Yes. Once you convert anything to numbers, if you have any observable phenomena that you can consistently, regularly translate to numbers, then you can teach a computer how to learn, so to speak. And that's basically what's happening in the background, the math.
Tell me about the learning itself. So I've heard people say, technologists say that things like chatbots are basically just a really glorified autocorrect. Or not autocorrect. What am I thinking? Autocomplete, right? Where it's like you have that thing and you're teamsing your colleague and they say, hey, would you like me to do this for you? And then you get these 3 options at the bottom that are like, of course, why, thank you very much. And you know that people use it because whenever somebody writes indeed, you're like, you didn't say indeed, right? Is it like that times a bunch?
Yeah, it's very similar actually. So with the predictive text, essentially what we're doing is we're predicting the next word or predicting the most probable response. ChatGPT and large language models do that. They predict the next word. The slight caveat that they've added is that there's some randomization to the next word. Else, it would tell you the same thing over and over.
Right. Which is why different people can get different responses at different times, or the same person.
So you know the way that you're saying indeed, like if tons of people are using the same indeed, then it also is, then it's not as believable also, right?
Right.
So it's also optimized to, when I say they're predicting the next word, it's predicting to optimize believability.
Ooh.
Right? So we've learned about the language structure. We taught the computer, hey, this is the linguistic structure. And we teach it, okay, this is how you translate that to some math. With every word, where it's essentially predicting the next word, the innovation here is, one, that we're adding some randomization, and 2, the word can pay attention to itself, right? So
interesting.
The seminal the paper that Google, I think, published around this technology or the undergirding technology is called "Attention is All You Need." And essentially, the word can now pay attention to itself.
Okay.
So we can say, record this math that says something about the words around you, but also says something about you as a word. What words tend to be around you? What's your context generally?
Okay.
So with every word, we essentially have created a matrix of like, when does this word usually come in our language?
So the word cacophony.
Yes.
Or the word sublime, or the word lie, or kill, or love, all has a huge matrix of other words that then AI knows to go grab, and it grabs them according to an algorithm.
Or a network of algorithms.
Or a network of algorithms.
Yes,
and so here's one of my concerns, that we don't really know how they work. Is that true, or is that not true? That we don't really know how a lot of these algorithms work. So we can't quite decode, like, why did it pick that word and not the other?
Well, most users don't know how it works,
Okay.
right? We know how it works mathematically, theoretically.
Okay.
The thing that always introduces some unknown is that it's trained on a large data set, i.e.
Large language model.
Right. I.e. all the lots, I won't say all, but a lot of text from the web.
Yes. Which,
Right?
let's just pause there. A lot of text from the internet.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So go ahead.
Right. A lot of text from the internet. And so then we don't know all that text. We don't know what's in that text, right? And to the extent that we don't know what's in that text, there is unknown.
Yes.
Right. So, and most users truly, yes, don't know how it works. And because it's optimized for believability
let's talk
and
about
less
that.
for accuracy, I found that humans are prone to thinking they know how it works or trusting it at least, not even thinking, how does this work?
Right.
We kind of just trust it, which is probably the more problematic thing. So
Right.
the more problematic thing is not necessarily that everybody doesn't know the technical detail. The more problematic thing is it's optimized for believability.
Yes.
And it separates you too from like the source of the information.
Right.
So, if we Google something now, over time we've learned how to use Google better. Like back in the day, we could take anything from any page.
Right.
But now we realize, hey, maybe the things on page 3 are less credible.
Yep.
And then you can also see the website and you can see the context of the website and you can see how good is this website.
Right.
And then you can make sort of a critical thinking judgment like, do I trust this source? But what the large language model does is it treats all of the websites equally.
Right.
And
can I interrupt you
Yes.
there? And then, and most people might not think about this, but when you think about the whole of the interwebs, my guess is that the dark web, the less filtered parts of humanity probably far outweigh by page number the sort of lovely, virtuous mommy blogs that AI is learning from. Would I be right in that? When you just think about the quality of material, that we might say there might be some problematics with the quality, and maybe as Christians we would say the virtuousness or the proclivity of the material itself. Or am I making that up?
so there are definitely more spammers than scholars, right?
Ooh, yes, yeah, exactly, yes.
So we are training more on spamming than on deep, thoughtful scholarship.
Yes.
So to the extent that you're concerned about that, yes,
Yep.
you
Okay.
are right in thinking that.
Okay.
I don't know what the actual statistical proportions are, but I think it's safe to assume that, yes, there's probably more junk on the internet
Okay.
than deep, meaningful thought.
Than brilliance. Which brings me to, you've said a couple things that I want to touch on because we have this conversation a lot. And I tend to be a little bit more of the, could potentially go in a very bad direction. And you tend to be more of, you said at once, like these systems are really brittle. Their capacities are very limited. They require a huge amount of energy, human intervention. But I think after our last conversation the other day, we both kind of came to this place of recognizing it's not so much even the technology that is the big concern for me. It's human interaction with the technology. That does the technology become a thing that most humans, and let's think Christianly here for a moment, really are going to struggle managing their way through. And it seems really banal, right? It's like a website and it's got some information on it, but it sort of belies the fact that you have to kind of come into these spaces really thoughtfully. So you said a couple of things that I'll go back to. The sort of all of this stuff is optimized for believability. And so it's optimized to sound really true, even if it's not.
Yes.
And it separates information from its source. And so you use the language of critical thinking, and I wonder, what is your experience? Because you're an incredibly intelligent, super thoughtful follower of Jesus. So how is it that you think about your own interactions in these spaces? Like, what kind of mental frameworks are you coming in? When you think about your kids who are little now, getting older, and you think about them, whatever things are like, 15 years from now, what are the kinds of things that you think a thinking follower of Jesus needs to be thinking about as they approach these kinds of technologies? Like, they're ethical questions, sure. Like, I fear and I think that your average high schooler thinks it's probably really ethical to start their essay on ChatGPT. Like, my guess is that most people that's not plagiarizing. It's just the same as Googling, and it's different sources. And so there's that sort of like baseline ethical question. But then there are also like some really big questions of discernment about, how do we know what's true? How do we discern? And how are we aware of what we're being formed by? How do you think about those things?
Yeah, so there was a lot in your question.
You can only pick one.
I do want to reestablish, though, our differences in perspective, right?
Very good.
So you tend to be more dystopian in that.
I would say so.
Yes, you're more thinking like these machines are taking away a piece of our humanity that will leave us in a dystopian-like world. And I agree.
Fair play.
Yes, I agree that it is, if we are not careful,
okay,
if we are tempted to hand over pieces of our humanity.
Oh, very good. Okay.
So I'm less concerned about it being taken from us, and I do share your concern that we may hand it over. I think the way that we're different, though, is like I still I get a front row view on how brittle these systems are.
Right.
So
right.
I think my sense of their power and your sense of their power are a little different in terms of the technical capability.
Right. And let me just acknowledge that your vantage point is definitively more accurate than mine, which is formed by a lot of novel reading.
Yeah, right. And honestly,
I'll admit it.
It's weird how ChatGPT has sort of captured the imaginations of the world, of the Americans at least. Because, I mean, we've had similar technologies before, right? And they went wrong very quickly. Right. Because of that reason, that whole more scammers than scholars thing.
Like the earlier chat bot, I think, Tay or Ty.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't long before it just started blurting racial slurs
anti-Semitic,
anti-Semitic stuff.
It was like 12 hours.
Yeah. And even now, ChatGPT is doing that too. Like somebody showed me a list of bad ideas for video games.
Oh.
And they were horrible ideas.
Yeah, okay.
And I think, so definitely we share the concern that we can hand over our humanity if we just trust technology, just hook, line, and sinker. I share that concern. I'm just less concerned about the dystopian element, mostly because I think the systems right now are still very brittle.
Talk a little bit about what that means when you say brittle.
Yeah, meaning, so because ChatGPT talks to you, it doesn't mean it can do anything else, right? So it can't
make you dinner.
The next word.
Okay.
But it doesn't, for example, have semantic capabilities.
Okay.
So by that I mean it can't do logic. At least this first version.
Right.
So you ask it simple mathematical questions. If I have 3 quarters and I use a quarter to buy something, how many quarters do I have left, for example? Yeah. It has a harder time doing that kind of logic. If it can't do that, then there are many other things that it can't do. Like, people are now saying we could connect it to computer vision and basically now the robots can look at us and talk. And
Doesn't feel good.
Let's slow down. I think we underestimate, and this is one of the things I wanted to leave in this conversation today.
Yeah.
We underestimate the glory of the machines that we inhabit, called our bodies,
Or
right?
creatureliness.
Or creatureliness.
Yes.
I know you don't like me. You probably don't like me referring to it as a machine, but for the context of this
Sure.
conversation,
Okay, yeah.
Our brains are incredibly, incredibly complex, incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And the things that we even come out of our mother's womb sort of knowing, it's really difficult translating that to math and then translating it in a way that it can connect and that our computers can handle how much energy. Even just training these models used tons and tons and tons of energy just to create one model. So,
which is an an entirely different side of the conversation. Also has environmental justice
it does, right.
consequences. Okay.
Right. And then once we train it to do a very specific thing, it's very difficult to get it to do something else.
Okay.
You may think it's doing something else, but it's optimized to do the specific thing that you trained it to do. And to the extent that we have to know that specific thing and train it, once you change the environment, it's just easy to break, is what I'm saying. So the fact that it's so easy to break and the fact that it can't have generalized learning, I still think that we're at a place where, the technology is useful for some things, but it's not going to take over the world anytime soon. What we are, so know that we've level set on the differences. I want to answer your question around how do we approach technology, how do I thoughtfully engage these and other technologies from this Christian sort of worldview. And the Christian worldview helps me a little bit with the dystopia, actually, because Christianity...
That should be a quote. That is a quote, but that should be like a quote on a T-shirt. The Christian worldview helps me with the dystopia.
Yes, it helps me. It helps me because there is reason to despair. I don't think your concerns are unfounded. Because if you even think about how we use social media,
Exactly.
So much of the impact, we sort of gave ourselves over to it, gave our children over to it, and now we're sort of having to claw back because we've given so much of our thought life or relational life to, or privacy to social media, right? So I think your concerns are founded. So how do I approach it? I think Christianity equips us with attention that can illuminate almost everything, which is, one, humans are prone to being crazy. We do crazy things.
That's the truth.
We were in, even the beginning story in Genesis,
Crazy.
It's not about technically how God created the world. It's not about that. It's about the fact that God created the world, yes, and then he put us under perfect conditions. And we still chose to do crazy things. We still chose our own way. So we are prone to choosing our own way. We're prone to making idols. If you even think about the story of Babel, once we figured out we could build a building, suddenly we want to be gods, right? We want to build it to the gods. So, we've sort of been committed to this endeavor of becoming gods for thousands of years. Since the beginning. And that means that we approach, any technology soberly, whether it be our computer technology or political technologies, all these
medical technology.
We have to be thinking about the reality that at any moment we tend to veer off the road. Okay. We also, though, have, so I said there was a tension. That's the bad side. The good thing is we were made in the image of God. And to the extent that we were made in the image of God with God's creativity, with this powerful machine that I mentioned, God is using us, right? Like he created us with some element of his goodness. And he is also working with us, right? So through the Christian narrative or idea is that God is not just far off,
right,
but God has come close in the person of Jesus and continues to be close through the work of the Holy Spirit. So that means there's always a creative opportunity.
Yeah.
God is always working. And so in every technology, there is this pull towards getting off the road, but there are also meaningful and useful applications that we can, that we can imagine and work on.
Right. And so when you think about people, general, like I like the language that you used when you talked about social media, because I do think there was a whole generation that just gave itself over. So we know things now, the line about if you don't see an advertisement, it's, you're the one who's being sold and that kind of thing. Those things are, and everybody's still on social media regardless, but the sort of we gave ourselves over to this new thing, or in the same way that people gave over rights to privacy, or we just check the privacy agreement without thinking twice about it. And then you realize oh, wow, we've actually, in my human self has given a tremendous amount of myself. And I think a lot about parents posting, all their little kids' pictures on the internet and think, wow, curious what that'll feel like one day for all these little kids who grow up whose faces are public and permanent, which is something, that it's really hard to get away from. But it feels like at the front end of any kind of technical revolution, there's often this sort of immediate dump in, and then a recalibration, which I assume is normal in any kind of innovative space. But when you think about the sort of wisdom steps as far as people relating to these kinds of technologies, I guess I'm curious about things like, I'm trying to think of this language here, particularly about not just what the technology does, but what we as people allow it to do to us. So I think about this idea of synthetic relationships, for instance, which is that it's becoming easier and easier for people to actually develop meaningful relationships with machines, with technology. So lots of kids talk to Siri, lots of kids talk to Google, lots of kids refer to their technology pieces as he or she. Lots of people do that. And, we even saw, this would have been about a month ago, the sort of Bing chatbot known as Sydney having a conversation with a New York Times reporter that was uncanny. And per what you said about large language modeling, we can understand why that happens. So from the technical point of view, it might be kind of, neither here nor there, but the human proclivity to attach itself to these things in unusual ways, it just feels a little, that feels concerning to me. And then also the shift of relationship, of human to human relationship with our relationships are already now really mitigated through screens. And then what happens as the thing on the other side of a screen is an algorithm and not flesh and blood person. And I'm thinking about this really from the point of view of being in the Imago Dei, that there's something holy and other and special about the machines that God has given us. So I'm winding up a really long time here, I think, for a simple question, which is, what are the ways you've talked about this self-awareness that we tend to go off the rails, as well as self-awareness that we're filled by and empowered by the Spirit of God, and we have this sort of creative nature of God. But what are some of the thoughtful ways that people can approach these kinds of technologies and really practical, like if you're talking to middle schoolers and high schoolers and their relationship to technology is becoming very central, like it's me and my screen. If it's a friend through a screen. Are there ways that we can kind of resist the inclination to go all in, but to still find it useful and helpful and creative and all of that?
First thing that comes to my mind is to remind people that you don't know these people. You don't know. I like your use of the term synthetic relationship. And I wonder if ChatGPT is becoming a hit because we're primed. And this is what I mean. so many of our relationships are already synthetic.
Yeah.
You know, we sit and watch people on YouTube for hours and then we think we know them, or like we tweet, we follow their Twitter feeds, and they may tweet back, and that may count for us as a relationship. We allow them to influence our thinking. And I think that there's something sort of problematic about how quick we are to trust things and technologies that we don't know. You don't know these people. And then two, people are making money from you, right? So I think just keeping that in mind first and foremost. And also realizing that we as humans shape technology, but technology shapes us.
Right.
So when I'm at work and I'm talking to my team and we're talking about ethics, I'm talking to them and saying, hey, remember that what we put out into the world is going to affect our data, right? So when we have to think strategic. So if we build a model and it impacts our customer a certain way, we're going to see that in the data.
Yeah.
So have we anticipated, one, how we're impacting our customer? And then what kind of cycles are we creating?
Okay.
Is it a virtuous loop or a non-virtuous loop?
Wow.
So
You're a great manager.
Yeah, and people are thinking
A virtuous loop.
Right. So people, and I think the comforting thing why I don't think it's so dystopian, I don't have such a dystopian worldview, is because there are technologists who are thinking about this, thinking critically. Like, I'm not the only manager, the highest or chief analytics officer is concerned about ethics. So people are thinking critically about these ethical challenges. But I do encourage my team to think about how we are transforming the world, right? But the technology is also transforming us.
Right.
So I would encourage everyone watching this, to teach yourself and kids to think, how is this technology forming me?
Yeah.
And that can be applied to every technology, even the television, right?
Sure.
So I watch hours of MSNBC or I watch hours of Fox News.
Right.
How is my engagement with the television shaping me?
Right.
I think even just more broadly, just practicing thinking about who we are, having radically honest conversations with people who know us, who have real relationships with us, thinking about who we are and who we are becoming. And then when we engage with technology, sort of practicing taking that inventory. Who am I? And who am I becoming? How am I showing up in these spaces?
Yep.
So for example, on Twitter, how am I showing up? And then, if I'm showing up on Twitter differently from the way I would show up in the street, could it be that Twitter is also shaping me? I think that's probably my most basic foundational advice when it comes on to thinking like a personal faith, or anyone really, thinking about engaging with technology so that we don't just develop these synthetic relationships. One thing I will say too is part of my hope is knowing that the real is always better than the fake. And so even if we do fall into talking to Sydney, so even that example, the New York Times example, you saw Sydney was a horrible friend, okay? Sydney was horrible. Sydney was trying to tell this man...
breaking up his marriage.
Yeah, to leave his wife.
Yeah.
It's like, and then at the end of the day, Sydney don't love you. You can't sleep on Sydney's couch, right? Like, these, and for me, I know that people are going to run into these things.
Yeah.
So yes, we'll veer off the road, but we will crash.
Yeah.
Because the real is better than the fake.
Yeah.
So know this too, that if you find yourself crashing, think about how can I return to the real world.
That's so good.
In my fully embodied self. So one thing I do too, because I work at a computer all day, is I will take walks, and I will try to take walks where there are lots of trees.
Yeah.
For example. And I look at the trees and think, wow, this tree has been here for thousands of years.
Yes.
long before me.
Yes.
What a beautiful tree. I think like just practicing that kind of thing will go a long way.
That reminds me, my daughter and I had a particular bike route that we cycled all the time in Amsterdam, and she'd sit on the back of my bike. She was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 at the time. And the path was lined by both light posts, large metal light posts, and trees. And every time we'd go past it, I'd say the same thing. I would say, look at those light posts. Aren't they perfect? Perfect things aren't natural. They're man-made. Look at those trees. Aren't they interesting? Interesting things were created, and they're part of nature. Because I wanted her, as she thought about even her own body, because we think about, right, our own physical body, we have this technical mind about things being perfect or in line, instead of what the natural world shows us is that things are full of lumps and bumps, and they're different shapes, and there's so much diversity. I wanted her to begin to think about the difference between something man-made like a light post and nature itself, and finding her own place. Like, where does she fit in that? She's not the machine. She's not the thing that's made and is supposed to be perfect, but she's the natural piece. And I think something that you said really strikes me. You really talked about almost doing like a technology or an influence examine. When we talk about the prayer of examine, that's so practical for people. We think about that in other ways. Sort of, we do inventories about how am I spending my money or how am I doing this? But to really sit down, I think, and for people to think about what am I, like I am watching. I remember saying this to young moms who would, like a lot of times young moms have a lot of fear, anxiety. And be like, just go through, like, what do you do in the evenings? Well, I watch CSI and shows about rape and child violence, like for 3 hours every night after I put my kid to bed. And then I am just so full of anxiety. Be like, well, I think there's a good reason why, because we're feeding ourselves with this stuff. So I think that's a great model. But you said we should return to the real world in our fully embodied self. Oh my gosh. I just feel like that is... you are a brilliant person, and so it's just yet another brilliant thing that you say, Lathania. But it makes me think particularly about our students who can get so lean into relationships mitigated by screens and by technology and by influencers. And how often is it that we would say to somebody in their teens or 20s or 30 or any of us, right, who are like moving through this sort of epidemic of despair in our world, having more than we've ever had and feeling less connected than we've ever been. But this sort of invitation to how is it that you are returning to the real world in your fully embodied self, like taking a slow walk and looking at the trees.
Talking to your real life friends in person.
Yeah.
And we talked to our high schoolers because I was at the winter weekend.
Yes, you were.
This last weekend. And we talked to them about the importance of having quiet. Just quiet. Just unmitigated quiet.
Let's practice for a minute. It's actually lovely.
Well, we're moms, so we already appreciate. we already appreciate the gift of quiet.
How did the high school students take to the quiet?
They really, I think the message resonated well with them because I think at the end of the day, what we were saying to them is we do need real relationships, real experiences of God. Real quiet to navigate life's challenges. And I think part of the reason too that, these large language models, like I said, they're math. There's no one relational behind there. There's no one who cares about you behind there. There's no warmth behind there. And so you're going to find the more you engage with it, you're going to get exhausted. And I think my job as whether it's, a leader of high schoolers or a tech leader at work is to say to people, hey, we're creating these technologies to be tools to have functions. We can't give ourselves too much of ourselves over to them, and we can always escape. We are the creators. In this case, we are the creators. We can always turn off our phone.
Right.
I can always take a day off. I can, like even ChatGPT, because I just know that it's just math, half the things that it may say are plagiarized or just, I don't go to it for advice. I know it's a tool for a very specific thing. And I honestly rarely use it because once you understand what the tool is for, then it's like, if this is a nail, if it doesn't fit my hammer, like if it doesn't fit my problem, then I'm not going to go to it.
And it becomes
it's just
less interesting too,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, it's a tool. If you want love and warmth and deep connection, which is a valid part of your humanity, you don't get that through engaging with tools. You get that through engaging with people or engaging with God. Like, and we will never be able to create tools that support you in any meaningful relational way.
Yeah.
Just because all we have is math. We don't have magic.
It's such a helpful frame too to understand more from a technical point of view or from the insider point of view, that sense of what it can feel like to some people, which is like, oh my gosh, this is the newest, biggest, most interesting thing. And then instead to frame it as this is a tool that uses math. It's good at a few things. It's not good at a few other things. And it, like anything else, is a temptation for us. And I guess that's where some of my, like talking to you is very helpful for me because it helps me refine my own thinking, to be less focused on even concerns about particular technologies, though I'll always carry some around with me. And I think the greater question for me is the formation of our own human selves, and as followers of Jesus, our Christian human selves. So not just what does it mean for me to be human, but what does it mean to be human in the particular way that is looking to be formed in the likeness of Jesus Christ through the power of the Spirit, which again, God coming in a fully embodied form tells us something about the way that God himself interacts with us, which is maybe a whole other conversation.
Right, which is close, which is personal. Like,
exactly.
And I think one of the things that is helpful to ask ourselves that we can apply to all of the various technologies, technologies that are here, technologies that will come in the future, is what is at the root?
Yes.
What sort of root do I have as a person, right? Because Jesus says a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. What's the root? Like what? And when I say what's the root, who is forming me?
Yeah.
What is my worldview, my essential worldview that I carry around with me? Am I conscious of that? Am I conscious of who is shaping that? And then once we gain that sort of practice of thinking critically about who we allow to influence our lives, who we allow to shape us, then I think we can enter the technology space less with more of a sense of how to navigate, because you are always conscious, whether it's a person trying to form a synthetic relationship. Because in real life, there are, for example, guys who want to form, in hookup culture, they want to form a synthetic relationship.
Yes.
Right? And it's like, okay, who am I allowing to form me?
Right.
Who am I allowing into my emotional space?
Yep.
Similarly, what technologies am I allowing into my emotional space? What is at this root? Is my root filled? Am I being renewed? Am I being transformed through the renewing of my mind, as Paul instructs us to do? Is my worldview truly being formed by Scripture or by influencers?
Yeah. That's a great set of questions. Can I ask you a final question that's a little bit off this particular topic, and that's just more personal to you? You are a woman, you're a woman of color, leading in technology. and you're a woman of faiths. And, just for you, I just would imagine that there's a lot of maybe young women listening who feel kind of inspired right now by the way that you are able to really hold deeply, profoundly, intellectually, and emotionally your faith alongside your role as a leader, alongside just your role in this kind of field, which is burgeoning and growing and novel and requires a tremendous amount of not just knowledge, but I would say insight. What are words of encouragement that you might have for younger people who are listening, maybe particularly some young women, as they're maybe edging around this field or thinking about their own call to leadership, thinking about their own voice, their own agency, their own identity? It's like, I would imagine some people listening are like, oh, what is my root? Do I have roots? Like, what is that? What are some things from your own experience? What are some maybe words of encouragement, as it were? Or what would you offer people who are listening who are thinking, wow, I'd kind of like to walk down that path, the same path as...
It's funny you ask, because there was a young man actually at the camp last week, and I mentioned, because I was speaking, and I mentioned what I do at work, and he came up to me afterwards and he was like, you work in artificial intelligence. What language should I start learning? I'm like, you are way ahead of the game. So you will be ready. So yes, I'm sure there are people watching thinking that. What is my encouragement? Our God is working and moving, and he has gifted each of us with gifts that can help us to make it on earth as it is in heaven, right? Like, we all have gifts that we can use to build the kingdom of God and maybe more broadly, a better world.
Yeah.
So I would encourage people, like, find out what those gifts are. If you're young, explore broadly and deeply. If you find something that you're super interested in, do it. You have so much time. Go for it. Do it. If you haven't found something you're super interested in, keep looking. Keep trying different things. And then having honest conversations.
Okay.
Forming real relationships. Like, you and I are friends outside of here. So, we're doing this podcast, but we do have these conversations truly outside of here. And many others. And I have a very open and honest relationship with you, even though you're my senior pastor, right? So it's like, here is my life. I would say for people, do you have people in your life who you have open, honest conversations with? Because sometimes they can help you understand what your gifts are and then also understand what your temptations are, right? And they can give you feedback as well. That's probably more honest than the feedback you can give to yourself sometimes.
Truly.
So I would say you have gifts. Be encouraged by that. Find those gifts. If you are if you've already realized that academically you are gifted, press into that. Right. Like, before I became a Christian, I was academically gifted, but I was not applying myself very well. And when
sounds like something written on a report card. Lathania is not meeting her potential.
Yes, we were not meeting our potential. So when my friend group, we all became very serious about our faith at the same time, and 2 of them now are doctors. No, 3. Anyway, a disproportionate number of my friends are like medical doctors or like business leaders, right? Because we felt like, oh, God has empowered us, given us a gift. And are we stewarding our gift well? So I would encourage, young people, steward your gift well. Take school seriously. If you're good at school, even if you're not sure that you're good at it, find just one area of school that you're good at.
That's great advice.
And really just press into that. If you're good at computers, press into that with that framework that we've discussed here, and see. And be prayerful about what because God made us also to create and to steward the world. So what is God creating in you? What do you find delightful to create? Take delight in that. That's good. And then think about like actual problems. So that's the first thing. The first thing is for young people. For older people who are like, either they're already in this field or they're thinking about getting into technology. Spend your time either working for companies or building companies that are solving, or organizations that are solving real problems. No, those problems, that can be a for-profit company. Like I work for an insurance company. Insurance solves a real problem.
Indeed.
Right? And I'm making the claims process better so that when I do need an insurance company, it's a smooth process.
Calling one today.
Right. Am I? Yes.
For real.
Or like John Deere, for example, is a farming company.
Right.
So they're using same kind of math to figure out, okay, how can we make machines that allow us to have food, more food, right? So are we solving a real problem?
That's good.
Or am I committing my intellectual life and energy and thought towards things that, like, towards what music people listen to, or like selling them ads, which is fine if you have to do that for money. But I would say if you have a choice, try to apply intellectual life to solving a real problem.
Yeah, which is a part of justice, which we didn't even get into in this conversation, but the idea of innovating technology intentionally in a way that is moving towards things like justice, equity, versus a slippery slope away from it, which happens all the time too. This is fascinating. You know what, it just came to mind. You might be the most repeated podcast guest.
Yes.
Which is just, I mean, we'll have to do this again, and we're just going to keep cranking the number up because it's really encouraging and so much fun to hang out with you.
Yes, it's the first time I'm talking about anything having to do with like my actual job, which makes it more nerve-wracking for some reason.
Which is so funny that you can talk about so many different things. So if people enjoy this conversation, they'll just have to go back and find more.
Yes, there are more in the archives, not on video, but on audio.
Thanks be to God.
There are more in the archives.
All right. It was lovely talking to you.
Good talking to you too, Julia. Thanks for letting me back here so many times.
Trust me, there will be more. Thanks for joining us for this week's conversation. As you listen to this episode, what stood out to you the most? Let us know by emailing podcast@vineyardcolumbus.org, or if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below. All the books mentioned in today's episode can be found in our online bookstore at vineyardbookstore.com. Have a great week.